mysterious. Well, hey everybody, welcome back to Cryptid Mysterious. I got a couple of really cool stories for you all tonight. Before we jump right into our first one, I'd love it if you'd smack that subscribe button for me and also that like button while you're at it. I do appreciate it. Well, let's jump into our first Bigfoot story of the evening. Or morning, whatever time of day it is you're listening. Hey, and if you would hit that notification bell, I've noticed that these videos aren't getting to everybody that's subscribed to the channel. So if you want to keep up on the new stories, that'll help you all out. The first one comes to us from Reggie. He begins, "It was in 1966 that I had been arrested for and convicted of Grand Theft Auto. The saying goes, if you commit the crime, you're gonna do the time. And do the time I did. I was sentenced to 5 years of hard labor. The area where the sighting had occurred was in the northeast section of Louisiana during the later portion of 1967. Now, I'm not proud of what I did and what I was doing and who I was at the time. But as you know, I'm a respectable member of society today, having paid my dues a long time ago. At the time, the warden had said to me that I wasn't perceived as being a threat, so he assigned me to the chain gang to do road work. The vast majority of our work assignments could have been done by machinery, but where would the fun be in that? We broke our asses in the hot sun, day in and day out, in retribution to society for our criminal activities. Most of what we were doing involved shoveling, raking, and removing litter. There was an armed guard with us at all times, and depending on who the assigned guard was, we could have had a decent day or a real ball buster. It was late in the day, nearing quitting time, when two of the boys started to have a little shouting match. It was something to the effect of one accusing the other of throwing rocks at him. The guard immediately stepped in, as the guy being accused stated that he hadn't thrown anything of the sort. Things kind of calmed down for a little bit, when suddenly this guy got hit again, right in the forehead. He was bleeding. So now there was no denying he had been hit with something. But by who? It was just seconds later, as the man was being attended to, that one of the other convicts said, "Will you look at that mother jumper?" He was pointing in the trees, and we all looked. Standing within a small opening in the woods, with its lower body concealed by the brush, was a large, hairy beast, which was about maybe 9-10 feet tall. All of us raised our shovels, preparing to defend ourselves if need be, but this thing was huge. The guard told us put our shovels down and sit in a circle, which was something we all did reluctantly. The guard then took his shotgun, pumped 2 rounds right at that B word. It screamed and ran off into the woods. Just before he popped him with 2 rounds of buckshot, this monster was rocking back and forth within the opening in the trees. As we stood watching, I had never seen anything like it in my life. And after the fact, 2 of the cons said that was a booger. I was sure the guard had hit him squarely because when I watched him reeling backwards from the impact, and the noise it made as it ran away sounded like a screaming woman. Now, this may all sound a bit odd to some, but large animals can and do run great distances after having been shot. And this was one large critter. It had to have been all of 9 or 10 feet tall. It was at least 4 feet wide or more at the shoulders. It was covered in long, grayish hair. Its body consisted of one muscle upon another. This gang that I was a part of, was a fairly rough crowd, with one of the guys having been convicted of beating 2 men to death with his bare fists in a bar fight. Another had drowned his own brother over crashing his sports car. Still, all of us were visibly shaken by what we saw. We could hear this monster crashing off into the woods. The guard walked closer to see if he could see anything more of it, but it was long gone. On the ride back in the van, the fellow that told us it was a booger started to tell us what he knew about these creatures. He was originally from Kentucky and told us there was a long history regarding these beasts going back hundreds of years in the region. Some calling them hairy men, others called them boogers. He said they were not to be fooled with. Many thought they were responsible for kidnapping children and killing people and livestock as well, especially in the old Indian folklore accounts. A year later, I was released for good behavior. I will never forget the events of that day on the side of the road. I had always said that someday I would like to go back to that spot and just stand there, but to this day, I have not done so. Well, before we jump into our next story, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for me and drop me a like. Hit that notification bell and drop a comment where you're listening from. I always love seeing where everybody's listening from around the world. Appreciate y'all. Let's jump into our second one. This one comes to us from Cole. He resides in the state of Kansas. And here's his story. In the early 80s, I was living with several other guys in somewhat of a communal arrangement in the Pacific Northwest. I'd rather not give specifics about exactly where it was. Should my old friend's wife ever read this, it would reopen some very nasty wounds which are better left closed. The fact that I mentioned this communal style of living has absolutely nothing to do with what happened. I simply mention it in order to give you a window into my life at the time. I had made a friend of a fellow named Chip. The two of us spent a fair amount of time together racing dirt bikes. We also liked to shoot. And Chip was a hardcore hunter at heart, whereas I was more or less given to target shooting, not willing to put forth the effort and commitment needed to hunt with Chip. At any rate, we had a nearby place where someone through the years had dug out a long cut through the earth with a dozer. The cut ended with a tall hillside of dirt at the back end of it. Chip named it the Pit. Well, I like to call it the Shooting Gallery. The cut ran downhill on a slight grade for about 400 feet, and at the back end, a wall of dirt was about 40 feet tall. We had some picnic tables to rest your gun and arms on, and we used to go there to target shoot and sight in our rifles. On September 27th, 1981, the weather was turning lousy, and it had started to drizzle outside. It was about 4 p.m. when my phone began to ring, and I'd picked it up. On the other end was Lana, Chip's wife. Now, they had only had one vehicle, and that was Chip's truck. She said that Chip had gone down to the pit earlier that day, adding that he was going to sight in his rifle for an upcoming hunt. 6 hours had passed, and she was getting worried. He had not returned. I told her, "Say no more. I'm heading over there right now." So I jumped in my truck and drove immediately over to the pit to check on Chip. The pit was about 15 or 20 miles from my house. By the time I got there, the day was already turning to night. Chip's truck was parked near the entry area, but Chip was not visible in the cab, nor did I see him anywhere in the pit, the entirety of which was wide open to the eyes. I got out of the truck and could see Chip's gear on one of the tables, and yet no gun and no sign of Chip. So I started shouting his name. There was no response, and I have to tell you, I was getting more than a little worried. I suddenly had a real bad vibe that something awful had gone down, and that's all I can say. Looking at the back corner of the pit's rear wall, I could see, based on the way the dirt was disturbed, that someone had climbed up the dirt wall in the corner. I thought that it was Chip who may have climbed it to do a little squirrel hunting or something. The rain was coming down heavier as I climbed up the corner myself. Once on top, I was looking around and immediately saw Chip's Minnesota Vikings hat on the ground. When I walked over to pick it up, the ground surrounding it was soaked in blood. There were large footprints all over the ground, and I am talking about size 20 XXXXXL prints. And they appeared to be from a gigantic barefoot human. Call it intuition or whatever you like, but I felt compelled to walk in a certain direction. Within a short distance from the edge of the woods, I came upon Chip's 30-06, bent in half, laying on the ground. I started screaming his name in every direction. I had no response, and I was suspecting foul play. I headed right down to where his truck was parked, only to find more of the same. Large footprints were surrounding the entire vehicle. Looking first in the window, and then upon opening the door, I had to try all I could do to not heave right on the spot. I knew that I was looking at Chip, but it didn't register in my brain in the moment as to exactly what had happened. Chip was dead. His eyes were literally bulging out of the sockets, with his body having been folded in half backwards. He was stuffed in the front seat under the dashboard on the passenger side of the cab. I started to sob profusely, holding my head while leaning on the hood of the truck. There would be no helping him now. His fate had been sealed. I tried to compose myself, and I jumped in my truck to go for help. Keep in mind that this was way before cell phones, and there weren't any phone booths out here, with this pit being in the middle of nowhere. I was racing down the highway at 100 miles an hour, and I saw a trooper up ahead. I pulled over, jumped out of the car, and ran to him. I could see that the trooper was already startled at my appearance. I told him there had been a killing, and as I was talking to him, he was already on the radio calling for backup. Leaving my truck on the shoulder, I jumped into his cruiser and the two of us raced back to the pit. When we got there, another unit was just arriving, and a third soon followed. Nobody could believe what it was we were looking at. I took 2 officers up the hill to see the area where I found the blood, his cap, and his gun. To a man, they never expected to see what they were now looking at. Chip and Lana were very good friends of mine, and I knew the responsibility was to be mine, and mine alone, to break this hideous news to Lana. That was almost 40 years ago, and I still can't break the hold that the events of that day had on my life. At that time, I never gave much thought to the existence of Bigfoot, but my opinion now is this. Chip and I had spent hundreds of hours together in that pit, and never did we once venture into the woods surrounding it. We simply parked, set up our targets, and shot at them, and walked back and forth checking on the results. I believe that on that day, Chip had come to do what we always did. But when I got there, no targets had been set up. My hunch is that he arrived, saw a Bigfoot walking along the top of the back wall, chambered around, and took a shot at it. I think that after the shot, he climbed up the hill expecting to see his trophy, but in a cruel twist of fate, the beast, not being dead, got the jump on him and killed him instead. Then, in a final act of vengeance, the Bigfoot bent up his gun and shoved his body in the most gruesome fashion under the dashboard of his truck. I have long since moved from that area of the country, but I keep in touch with Lana to this day. She has remarried, has 3 children. Thankfully, she's never seen the condition that Chip was in. When I saw him, neither I nor the police told her. It was reported that he had been killed, presumably by a bear, and that's the way the whole affair ended. I never go to the woods anymore in any remote areas, and if you were to ask me, I would tell you that you shouldn't either. Well, guys, what do you think of that one? I think I've heard a story like this one before. Man, those are tough ones to come across. That was all the way back in 1981. Have any of y'all heard a Bigfoot encounter like that? Finding a body just twisted up like that, bent guns. I mean, I've heard stories like that where bodies are shoved into the crooks of trees and guns are bent up and whatever. Yeah. Well, as much as I like all these Bigfoot stories, obviously these kinds are the most difficult ones. But in light of Bigfoot being a real creature and us bringing light to it by sharing these stories, don't pick and choose what story we bring to you. If we got a testimony, we'll bring it out to you. Well, I do appreciate y'all hanging out with me. I'd love it if you'd put your thoughts in the comments. And if you've had a Bigfoot encounter or any kind of mysterious thing happen, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear about it. cryptidmysterious@gmail.com. I appreciate y'all, and I'll see y'all in the next one.